Welcome everyone, it's Dr. Lindner here, and in this video we're going to be looking at biology. We're going to be focusing on the upper extremity. When I say the upper extremity, we're going to be looking at muscles around the scapula, around the shoulder, around the elbow joint. Remember when we talk about this portion, we say the arm. This is the arm, and then this portion here is going to be the forearm, Okay, so this is important when we talk about arm flexion versus forearm flexion, right? When we talk about actions, you can't just say flexion or extension, you'd have to say arm flexion or forearm flexion or shoulder. So when we're talking about the arm, we also talk about shoulder. They're interchangeable. Shoulder flexion, shoulder extension, shoulder abduction. When we talk about the forearm, we could also say elbow. Elbow flexion, elbow extension, supination, pronation of the elbow. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at the scapula, right? This is what we're looking at here. Here is the scapula. Let's point out some key landmarks that I know all of my students remember from osteology. So there's your superior angle. Here's your inferior angle. Here's your medial border, aka vertebral border. Here is the spine of the scapula, or scapula spine. And then right here is the acromion process, right? So I'll put acromion here, acromion process, ACP. Okay, so this muscle right here is the trapezius, however, it's cut. So we can see right here is where they slice the upper trapezius off. And the reason why they dissected that away is it allows us to see the muscle that is just above the spine of the scapula, or the scapular spine. The muscle above it is the supraspinatus. Supraspinatus. And once we go below, all of this, I'm going to outline it for you here. All of this, that's the infraspinatus. You have a supraspinatus and you have an infraspinatus. Those are two of the four rotator cuff muscles. You can't see the insertion of the infraspinatus because the deltoid right here is superficial and it's covering it up. But the four rotator cuff muscles are the supraspinatus, infraspinatus, Teres Minor, I'll do a small m for minor, and then subscapularis. This is what we call sits muscles, sits, supraspinatus, infraspinatus, Teres Minor, and subscapularis. Now these three, the supraspinatus, infraspinatus, and Teres Minor, they all insert on the greater tubercle. And that's why you can't see it, because the greater tubercle is like right around here, but it's deep to the deltoid. If the deltoid was dissected, you'd be able to see it. And the subscapularis, that inserts on the lesser tubercle. Okay, so these are the insertions. I'll put an I for insertions. Where are the origins? Well, the supraspinatus and the infraspinatus, the supraspinatus and the infraspinatus, they originate on the fossa based on the name, right? So the supraspinatus originates on the supraspinous fossa, whereas the infraspinatus originates on the infraspinous fossa. Don't write infraspinatus fossa and supraspinatus fossa. There's no such species. It's the supraspinous fossa and the infraspinous fossa. So those are the origins for these two muscles, the subscapularis originates on the subscapular fossa. So that's pretty neat, right? 3 of the 4 rotator cuff muscles originate on their corresponding fossa. The supraspinatus originates on the supraspinous fossa. Infraspinatus originates on the infraspinous fossa. Subscapularis originates on the supraspinous fossa. We'll get into Teres Minor in just a second, because now here we can see, again, here's the vertebral border, aka medial border of the scapula. Here's the scapula spine. This is the upper trapezius that's cut, right? That's the upper trapezius. And then deep to it, which we really can't see, that would be the supraspinatus. Okay, that would be supraspinatus. If it was tilted a little bit, we'd be able to see it. So here's the infraspinatus, all of this. This is all infraspinatus. And now we have the Teres brothers. We have Teres Minor and Teres Major, but only one of them is a rotator cuff muscle. It's the minor. Okay, remember we have sits, S-I-T-S. And the T is for Teres Minor. So this one here is the rotator cuff, not this one here. Now their actions are pretty straightforward, and we're going to learn the actions this way: AB, EX, EX, IN. AB, EX, EX, IN. Now, this is how I like to do it, right? If you watch me, AB is this. This is shoulder abduction. So that's AB, abduction. EX, EX. The EX is not for extension. It's for this. It's for external rotation. So this is external rotation. This is internal rotation. Again, this is external rotation. This is internal rotation. It's in relationship to the greater tubercle of the shoulder. So this is going externally. This is going internally, the greater tubercle. Externally, internally. So the actions are AB, EX, EX, IN. What are the rotator cuff muscles? Supraspinatus, infraspinatus, Teres Minor, subscapularis. Those are the actions. AB, EX, EX, IN. AB, EX, EX, IN. Supraspinatus, infraspinatus, Teres Minor, subscapularis. Those are the actions. AB, EX, EX, IN. Now, Teres Minor and Teres Major, they are antagonistic to one another. Antagonistic, meaning they do opposite things. So once we know what Teres Minor does, which is external rotation, you can figure out what Teres Major does, which is the opposite of that if it's antagonistic. So if Teres Minor is an external rotator, what type of rotation would Teres Major do? It would be an internal rotator. Okay, so they oppose one another. Okay, and here's the deltoid, but we're looking at this portion is the posterior deltoid because it's in the back side. And then this portion here on the lateral side, that's the middle deltoid. And then in the front, you'd have an anterior deltoid. So the deltoid has 3 divisions, right? It's kind of shaped like this. So there would be an anterior division, a posterior division, and then there'd be a middle division. If we're looking at the deltoid from the side view, right? Then the anterior division would bring the arm this way, which would be shoulder flexion. The posterior division would bring the arm back, which is extension. And then the middle fibers would bring the arm straight out, which is abduction. So since we're looking at the posterior deltoid from the back, it pulls the arm backwards, and that motion is called shoulder extension. If we look at it from the lateral view here, the middle deltoid pulls the arm laterally, which is called shoulder abduction. And then the front fibers of the delt bring the arm or the shoulder forward, which is shoulder flexion. Okay, now we can take a look and see with the deltoid here, right? The deltoid was attached. We're now dissecting it. And now we can see the infraspinatus and the teres minor. You can't really see the supraspinatus too well, but it's kind of tucked in underneath the upper traps. So here's the infraspinatus, all of this, infraspinatus, and we could see it's wrapping around to attach there. Here's the teres minor, also wrapping around to attach to that same place. That place would be the greater tubercle. Okay, and then teres major is wrapping around the front of the humerus. This is the back of the humerus. This one's wrapping around, then it's going to attach to the bicipital groove, which is in the front of the humerus. So you have this tug of war going on where the infraspinatus is in the back. Think of this pen as the humerus. One muscle's in front of it, one muscle's in the back, and it's doing this. Teres major and teres minor are going to be rotating that humerus internally and externally because one's in front, one's in back. Now, if you look at teres minor and you look at teres major, there is a belly of a muscle and a tendon that gets sandwiched between these two muscles. Here's teres minor, here's teres major, here's the long head of the triceps, and this is the tendon of it. This is all belly of the muscle, but you can see that it gets sandwiched. It gets kind of compressed between teres minor and teres major. So great landmark, something in your mind to remember. When you see the sandwich, you know it's teres minor, teres major, and the long head of the triceps brachii. Remember, triceps means tri, it means three. There's a long head. There is a lateral head, and then there's a medial head. There's three heads to the triceps. It's a pretty large muscle. But the one that pierces between teres minor and major is the long head of the triceps. Now we're taking the same thing. We're taking this, and we're just going to rotate it around so that we're not looking at it from the posterior view anymore. We want to look at it from the anterior view. You can see on the top left there, it says anterior view of the shoulder. And here is that last rotator cuff, right? We said it sits, S-I-T-S. Supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, and subscapularis. Subscapularis originates on the subscapular fossa. The subscapular fossa, and this is the one, remember these three insert on the greater tubercle of the humerus. Subscapularis inserts on the lesser tubercle, which is more anterior. Okay, and then remember their actions, AB for abduction, EX for external rotation, EX for external rotation, and then IN for internal rotation. That's what the subscapularis does. So now, if you look at it a little bit deeper, remember these are called the rotator cuff muscles. All of them rotate except for one, right? The supraspinatus doesn't do any rotation, but these three rotate externally, externally, and internally. But the supraspinatus is an abductor of the shoulder. Okay. Okay, what else can we see here from the front? We see a little bit of pec major. We see a little bit of pec major, and pec major has two divisions. One division that originates off of the clavicle, so they call it the clavicular head. And then another portion originates off of the sternum, so they call it a sternal head. And this is why when people are at the gym and they're training and exercising their chest, they change the angle of the incline or decline so that they can target different fibers of the pec major muscle. Okay. Here is the lats or latissimus dorsi. It's cut. It's cut. Here is the lateral view of the shoulder. Here's the lateral view. So here's the clavicle. Here's the acromion process. And then here is the deltoid. And here's the anterior deltoid. Here is the middle deltoid. And here's the posterior deltoid. So when the anterior fibers contract, it's going to pull the arm this way, which is shoulder flexion. When the posterior fibers contract, it pulls the arm posterior, which is called shoulder extension. And when the middle fibers contract, then it pulls it straight up, which is shoulder abduction. The insertion site, which is right in here on the humerus, there's an insertion site called the deltoid tubercle. The deltoid tubercle, that's the insertion. Deltoid tubercle. And here is pec major, but these are the clavicular fibers. That's pec major, clavicular fibers. We could see here, this would be going this way, which would be the sternal division of pec major. So there's clavicular fibers and sternal fibers. Okay, now we're going to be looking at the arm, and we can see that it looks like there's one muscle here on the anterior, and there's one that's a little bit deeper, and then we have some that are posterior, right? So this is anterior, and then back here is posterior from the lateral view. Now we're looking at the shoulder from the anterior and a little bit on the medial. So it's anterior and medial. What we see up here, this is the front of the scapula. So this is the subscapularis. That's the subscapularis. This bone right here is the coracoid process. That's the coracoid process. So what muscles attach to the coracoid process? Well, we see this one here, and look at the name. The name is called Coraco Brachialis. So Coraco, because of the origin being the coracoid process, and then Brachialis for the insertion, which is the brachium, which is the arm. So this is the O, and this is the I for origin insertion. Some muscles are named based on origin insertion. This is a classical example, Coraco Brachialis. The other muscle that attaches there is this large muscle here called the Biceps Brachii. Now, bicep, bi means two. So there's a long head, and then there's going to be a short head. Those are the two heads of the bicep. So the one that originates on the coracoid process is the short head. That's the short head of the biceps brachii. Okay, not the long head, the short head. Okay. Now we're looking at, before it was anterior and medial, now we're looking at anterior and a little bit lateral, right? So here's the anterior lateral view of the arm. We could see the deltoids. We'll put a D there for deltoid. Somewhere in there would be the deltoid tubercle. Now we have the biceps brachii. You can kind of see right there, there's a little bit of a division because it's two heads. So there's going to be a short head, and then there's going to be a long head. But generally speaking, when we're down here, more distally, this is the belly of the biceps brachii. Now, just deep to it, if we were able to dissect this and pull it away, there's a muscle that's just deep to it called the brachialis. Okay, and the brachialis is a very powerful elbow flexor. And the reason why it's so strong is that it crosses the elbow joint as a muscle. Whereas if you look at the biceps, it crosses the elbow joint as a tendon. So whenever a muscle crosses a joint and the belly of the muscle is actually crossing the axis or the joint itself, it makes it a very strong muscle. Now, both of these are going to flex the elbow. Both of these flex the elbow. The biceps brachii can do 3 actions. The biceps brachii can do 3 actions. It does 1 action at the shoulder, and then it does 2 actions. It does 2 actions at the elbow. Now, since the bicep is in the front and it crosses the glenohumeral joint anteriorly, if a muscle's in the front, it has to move the limb to the front. If a muscle's in the back, it moves the limb to the back. So now it's just, well, what do we call the forward motion? What do we call the backward motion? If the biceps are in the front and it's pulling the arm forward, we call it shoulder flexion. So that's what it does at the shoulder, shoulder flexion. What does it do at the elbow? It does elbow flexion and supination. Supination. So when you're holding, let's say, a screwdriver, see if I can show this on myself. Here's the screwdriver. And if it's my right hand and I'm supinating, you can see that as I supinate, you can see my biceps are contracting. So the biceps is a very, very strong supinator. That's with the elbow bent, not with the elbow extended. That's different. The elbow has to be bent, and then you gain a lot of strength and power for supination. So the biceps is a very powerful elbow or forearm supinator and elbow flexor. At the shoulder, it does shoulder flexion. Okay. The brachialis can flex the elbow as well, and it's very strong in the pronated position. So this is why when you see people exercising, sometimes, let's see if I can show it, sometimes you see people, let's say they're doing, I don't know if I'm in the field of view, they'll do curls of the elbow joint where they do it supinated for their biceps brachii, or they turn their hand face down and they do curls this way for the brachialis, or they do hammer curls in the neutral position for a muscle called the brachioradialis, which is right here. It's another elbow flexor, brachioradialis. So your elbow can flex in 3 ways, right? It can flex supinated. It can flex in a supinated position. It can flex in a neutral handshaking position, and the elbow can flex in a pronated position. So we have biceps brachii in a supinated position. We have brachialis in a pronated position. And in the handshaking neutral position, that's a muscle that I just circled here called the brachioradialis, which I'll show you in a second. Now we're taking the arm and we're turning it around. So we're looking at the arm from the posterior, and it's the right arm. So remember, the triceps has 3 heads. Tricep means 3. There's a long head, there's a lateral head, and then there's a medial head. So this right here is the lateral head. Here's the long head. And then way down in here, this is the medial head. So lateral head, this is lateral. This is the long head. Remember, the long head pierces between teres minor and teres major. If this picture was a little bit higher up, you'd be able to see that. And then right here is the triceps medial head. There's a short, powerful, synergistic muscle to the triceps that many people have never heard about, and it's called the Anconeus. The Anconeus is a short yet powerful elbow extensor. It's synergistic to the triceps. Okay, we'll take a pause here, and then we're going to look at, we'll continue with the muscles of the upper extremity, but we're going to focus on the forearm muscles, okay?